Previously on the No-Frills Teacher Podcast. Classroom transformation's good. Balancing life and work, good. Megan Trainor, bad. Really bad. Now, sit back and relax for the Season 2 premiere of the No-Frills Teacher Podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Season 2 premiere of the No-Frills Teacher Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Camps, and damn, it's been way too long. For those of you out there that have been following this show since the beginning of Season 1, welcome back. For those of you who are listening to this podcast for the first time, buckle up, baby. With people returning back to school and with others getting ready to return back to school, I found that today's episode is fitting that we call it, Did You Submit Your Lesson Plans? Because I know that personally, that's something that I often struggle with as an educator, more so as a veteran teacher, with struggling with the submission or the idea of submitting or creating lesson plans. And what I mean by that is not necessarily that I am against creating lesson plans, but the question that I want to pose to you, the audience, those of you out there listening, is it truly important to create lesson plans? Is it important to create detailed lesson plans, or is that something that just should be reserved for novice teachers? Do veteran teachers need to create the same type of lesson plans as novice teachers? Do veteran teachers need to create lesson plans at all, or should they be trusted as professionals? Should novice teachers be trusted as professionals and not need to create lesson plans? What's the point of lesson plans? Are they being followed to fidelity? Are administrators checking up on lesson plans? How about the administrators that are very strict with the expectations for lesson plans, where you have teachers that are working on their plans and they take an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and they have pages and pages of plans. And then you have another teacher, same county, who spends maybe a page that took them about 15 minutes. Yet when they're getting their evaluation, those teachers, depending on their principal, might receive a highly effective for their planning, and a teacher who put more time and effort into their lesson plans and has spent countless hours creating the perfect plan gets an effective from their manager because it's all subjective. Furthermore, who are the lesson plans really for? Is it for the teacher? Is it for an administrator? Is it for a sub? Well, then you're just going to have sub plans usually. Are teachers going back to their lesson plan book or whatever online program they're using throughout the day and constantly referring to their plans to make sure that they're on pace with their instruction? We know that's not true. How about the times when you have lesson plans and you put that a certain time during the day you're going to teach a certain subject or do a certain lesson, and then all hell breaks loose? There's a fire alarm, there's some sort of lockdown drill, or a student gets sick, or you have to adjust on the fly. Now you have somebody coming in for an observation, and they're anticipating, because they looked at your lesson plans, that during this particular time of day, you're going to be doing this specific lesson or covering a particular standard. And We know how that goes. That the reality of it is that whenever you have somebody come in for an observation, more times than not, they're coming in at a time when you intended to do something, but something changes throughout the day or you adapt because a good teacher should be flexible with your instruction and you're not doing the lesson that you say you're doing at the time you're saying you're doing it because that's unrealistic. Nobody in the classroom follows their lesson plans to a T when they're saying they're going to do something at a certain time and that person walks in for an observation or just walks in and sees that lessoning happening at that exact time. So I've seen this come up recently on social media, um, on Instagram mostly, where I follow a few teachers on there, and that question came up about lesson plans and teachers. There's the one camp where teachers are against lesson plans and saying, hey, I'm a professional, treat me as a professional, and trust my professional judgment. I know my kids need, I know what I need to do. It's not like you have a teacher that's going rogue and not going, they're following the instructional plan, the pacing guide, the standards in their state, whatever it is they're doing. And they know that because they're professionals and they know what they need to teach. They know when they need to teach it. And yes, there are many wonderful professionals in different curriculum departments and academic services and many different counties, many different states, many different countries, depending on the school system that you're teaching in. And you are expected to follow standards and benchmarks and all that stuff, right? At certain times of the year and during certain quarters. Nobody's saying that you should not do that. But, however, as a professional, should you have to type that up? Should you have to put it in some sort of program for or Google Doc and share it, whatever it may be, to share with your administrative team and saying, this is what I'm doing? Or should you be trusted as a professional and use your professional judgment and know that you're going to get this done? I suppose there's the other camp where people are like, well, not everybody's professional, and that's where you might get into trouble because people do go off, you know, and they do their own thing, and they're not following a plan, and they're kind of going rogue, and yada 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 yada, right? So I get that people would say that, but mainly the majority of education professionals should be entrusted with knowing what is best for their students. That's just my opinion. Perhaps you disagree. I want to circle back to something I said earlier, where you have two teachers at two different schools, but in the same county, two different principals, and one teacher is spending countless hours perfecting and creating the most intricate of detailed lesson plans, and they still can't receive a highly effective rating on preparation or planning. You have the other teacher at another school, puts in the bare minimum, and they still get a highly effective. These are true stories. These things do happen out there in many schools across many counties, across many states. And once again, it goes back to being subjective, right? From your principal, your assistant principal, whomever is reviewing your lesson plans. Sometimes this also happens within the same school where you have teachers that are creating very detailed lesson plans and putting in the time. Of course, it's after hours, after contract hours, because teachers usually don't get their planning in because when they have scheduled planning periods during the workday, things come up, whether they're meetings or PLCs, whatever it may be. And we know that planning periods in your planning time is not truly for planning. If you're lucky, you get that. Some teachers don't even get that. It depends on where you teach and where you live. But now you have two teachers that are in the same building, perhaps, and they both get the same ratings, or let's say they both get highly effective. You think that they would generally be happy getting a highly effective, but that could also breed resentment within the school itself, and then that could poison the culture or the community of the school where teachers become resentful of one another when there are those that are putting in all this effort, all this work, and getting the same result as the teachers that are putting in the bare minimum. And that's something that's never really addressed. Here's something else to think about. Are lesson plans truly being looked at and reviewed by administrators? Now, I'm sure that there are principals out there, assistant principals out there, that look those over closely, lesson plans, and make sure that you have your accommodations and make sure you have your standards and all that good stuff. But I know there are also administrators out there who just look to see if your plans were submitted, and they never look at them and never check them, but they still give you credit for them being turned in. I know of times where it's happened, not myself personally, but through various friends and colleagues in various counties and states, where they would share with me that they were recycling old lesson plans and still receiving credit for them because they knew that their administrator wasn't even looking at them, but they would just check in the system to see if they were submitted on time. What message does that say to the teachers? What message does that say to any colleagues who are really taking their time and every week creating new and engaging lesson plans and putting that time in? And then you have your colleague who's just regurgitating previous lesson plans, maybe making a couple of tweaks here and there, and still receiving credit for that because it's something that's not taken seriously by the administrative team. So if you haven't guessed by now, I'm a big advocate of teachers not submitting lesson plans if they're veteran teachers or experienced professionals. However, I do believe that new teachers to the profession, novice teachers, career changers that are new to the profession, they should continue to do lesson plans and they should follow lesson plans as closely as possible as a guide until they get their feet wet, so to speak. Lesson plans are very good for keeping pace of your instruction, and lesson plans are good to refer back to. I know when I first started teaching, I was always looking back at my lesson plans, but now, as a veteran teacher of over 18 years, I have enough confidence in myself and my teaching abilities and my knowledge and my professionalism that I don't need to look back at a program or I don't need to look back in a lesson plan book to know what I should be doing when I'm supposed to be doing it and what time I should be doing that. I should be trusted. That does not say that I don't have to submit lesson plans because I'm required to submit lesson plans in my county, my school, and I adhere to that as a professional. However, as a on a philosophical basis, it's not something that I personally agree with doing, and I do feel that professionals should be trusted as professionals. I'm not saying novice teachers are not professional; they are very professional. Some of them are way more professional than veteran teachers that I know. However, as far as a tool to help support a novice teacher or somebody new to the profession, I think that creating and sending in lesson plans, sharing lesson plans with colleagues or administrators is a very good thing to do. However, with that being said, even if new teachers should create lesson plans or career changes create lesson plans, anybody new to the teaching profession, we should just remove it from any sort of end of year evaluation itself because it is so subjective and it is completely unfair. The ratings that teachers receive based off the subjection, really, of their administrator. So I'm going to wrap up this episode by giving a friendly reminder to all teachers out there that listen to this podcast. Remember to submit your lesson plans this week so you don't get dinged. Also, thank you to everyone who has been such a huge part of supporting this podcast from day one. I made a joke during the very first episode that I would only get two listeners. I hope I had more than two people listening. And I think my second episode, I had even referred back to it and said, if you're one of the two listeners that were following or listening to this podcast, thank you for sticking around. And to think now that I'm able to start my second season of this podcast and have over 1,100 downloads in just a few months is truly remarkable. And I could not do that without all of you out there that are listening to this podcast. So thank you for making this possible This podcast has now been heard in 11 different countries, which is very exciting. It is currently being featured on Podbean. So if you listen on Podbean, go check out the featured section. You will see this podcast right there when you go onto the website or you go onto the app. I've been heard on Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Stitcher, go on and on and on, and various other platforms to see this podcast grow and be um, listened to and downloaded on these various major podcast platforms is truly humbling. And I'm so happy that I could share this podcast with everyone out there. And for those that are listening, uh, that are not part of the podcast community who currently does follow me, I encourage you to go ahead and click that follow button, send some comments. You love this podcast? Let me know what you love about it. You hate this podcast, but you listen anyway? Let me know what you hate about it. But any sort of feedback is good feedback, I say. So I'll take those suggestions. You have suggestions, send them my way. Send the love, send the comments to my international audience. Hello, thank you for listening. This is recent, having this podcast go beyond the United States, and I'm very excited about that. Seeing that I'm being heard in the UK and Germany, Australia, Nigeria, Morocco, so many wonderful countries, and it's an absolute honor. So thank you for joining and listening to this podcast and downloading the episodes. Make sure you share the love. Any reviews, go ahead, send them in. Any suggestions for future podcasts, I'd love to hear about it and see if I can make that a reality. But most importantly, thank you for supporting me. Keep listening, keep downloading, and keep living that no-frills teacher lifestyle. I'm Joe Camps, aka the No-Frills Teacher, and this is the No-Frills Teacher Podcast.